I found the hotel receipt in her jacket pocket on a Tuesday, the Meridian, downtown. The same night she'd told me she was working late at the gallery. I was 52 years old, standing in our bedroom with trembling hands, and I realized I'd become exactly what I'd promised myself I'd never be: invisible. My partner of 8 years had been sleeping with one of her interns, a 22-year-old art student named Riley with perfect skin and the kind of careless confidence that only comes from never having had your heart broken. I could have fallen apart. Instead, I decided to remind the world and myself exactly what a woman like me was capable of. I found the hotel receipt in her jacket pocket on a Tuesday, the Meridian downtown, the same night she told me she was working late at the gallery. I was 52 years old, standing in our bedroom with trembling hands, and I realized I'd become exactly what I'd promised myself I'd never be: invisible. My partner of 8 years had been sleeping with one of her interns, a 22-year-old art student named Riley with perfect skin and the kind of careless confidence that only comes from never having had your heart broken. I could have fallen apart. Instead, I decided to remind the world and myself exactly what a woman like me was capable of. The confrontation was almost anticlimactic. When Sarah walked through the door that evening, I was sitting on the couch with a glass of Merlot, the receipt placed carefully on the coffee table between us. She froze in the doorway, her messenger bag sliding off her shoulder. "Diane," she started, but I held up my hand. "Don't," I said quietly. "Just don't insult me with lies." She sank into the armchair across from me, and for a moment, we sat in silence. 8 years of shared mornings, inside jokes, lazy Sundays, and whispered promises hung between us like ghosts. "How long?" I finally asked. 3 months. Her voice was barely a whisper. 3 months. A quarter of a year while I'd been planning our summer vacation to Santorini, reorganizing our home office, living in blissful ignorance. Why? The question felt pathetic even as I asked it, but I needed to hear it. Sarah ran her hands through her hair. That gesture I'd once found endearing now just looked like guilt. "She makes me feel young again, alive, like there's still possibility in the world." The words hit me like a physical blow. At 52, apparently, I represented the opposite: stagnation, the end of possibility, the comfortable death of excitement. "I see," I said, standing up. My hands were steady now, my voice calm. "Then I think you should go stay with her tonight, and tomorrow we'll figure out the logistics." "Diane, please, can we just—" "No," I interrupted, walking to the door and opening it. "We can't. You made your choice, Sarah. Now live with it." After she left, I didn't cry. I poured myself another glass of wine, sat by the window overlooking the city lights, and something shifted inside me. The initial shock was crystallizing into something else entirely, not rage, but determination. For years, I'd poured myself into our relationship, into being the supportive partner while Sarah's career flourished. I'd put my own artistic ambitions on hold, convinced myself that stability mattered more than dreams. I'd let myself become background noise in my own life. That ended tonight. I pulled out my laptop and opened the email I'd archived 6 months ago. An invitation from Marcus Chen, curator at the Modern Contemporary downtown, asking if I'd ever consider exhibiting my photography again. At the time, I'd declined, too busy with us to think about me. I hit reply and began typing. "Marcus, if the offer still stands, I'm interested. Let's talk." The next morning, I called my best friend Veronica. "Finally," she said when I told her everything. "Now we can get you back to being the Diane I remember." The photography studio I'd abandoned 7 years ago was in worse shape than I'd imagined. Dust covered everything. My equipment sat in cases like archaeological artifacts, and the dark room smelled of abandonment and missed opportunities. But as I stood in the center of that space, something ignited. Marcus had given me 3 months to prepare for a solo exhibition. 3 months to prove I was still relevant, still vital, still here. I threw myself into work with an intensity I'd forgotten I possessed. I photographed the city at dawn, capturing the vulnerability of urban life in those quiet hours. I documented the lives of women over 50, their strength, their sexuality, their refusal to disappear. My subject matter had shifted. Gone were the safe, pretty landscapes I'd hidden behind. Now I was exploring raw truth, aging bodies that carried stories in every line and curve, intimate moments that society pretended didn't exist for women like us, the fierce beauty of experience. 6 weeks into my renaissance, I met her. I was photographing at a downtown rally for LGBTQ plus housing rights when I saw her across the crowd. She was holding a sign, her silver hair catching the afternoon sun, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. She looked to be in her late 40s, dressed in a leather jacket and jeans that suggested she'd never cared much about other people's expectations. Our eyes met, and she smiled, not the polite smile of strangers, but something knowing and direct. After the rally, she approached my setup. "You're Diane Foster," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am, and you are?" "Michaela Torres. I used to follow your work before you disappeared from the scene." She studied my camera with appreciation. "What brought you back?" "Betrayal," I said honestly, and the realization that I'd been disappearing myself long before anyone else could. She laughed, a real throaty sound that made something flutter in my chest. "I like honest women. Buy you a coffee?" We ended up talking for 3 hours at a cafe nearby. Michaela was an architect who'd divorced her husband at 45 after finally accepting she was a lesbian. She'd rebuilt her entire life from scratch, losing friends and family, but gaining herself in the process. "The world wants women like us to shrink," she said, her dark eyes intense. "To apologize for taking up space, for still having desires and ambitions. Fuck that." I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. As we parted, she touched my hand lightly. "I'd love to see your new work sometime." "I'd like that," I replied, meaning it more than I'd meant anything in months. Opening night arrived with the crisp energy of October. The gallery buzzed with collectors, critics, and curious onlookers. My photographs lined the walls, 30 pieces chronicling transformation, resilience, and the unapologetic existence of women over 50. I stood near the entrance in a black silk suit I'd bought specifically for tonight, my silver-streaked hair styled in a way that said I'd stopped apologizing for aging. Veronica appeared at my elbow with champagne. "You look incredible," she whispered. "And have you seen who's here?" I followed her gaze. Sarah stood near one of my photographs, Riley hovering uncertainly beside her. My ex looked older somehow, tired in a way that had nothing to do with years and everything to do with regret. But I barely registered her presence because Michaela had just walked in, stunning in a burgundy dress that made heads turn. She caught my eye and smiled, making her way through the crowd toward me. "Diane," she said warmly, kissing my cheek. "These are extraordinary. You've captured something most people spend their whole lives running from, the truth of who we become." Marcus appeared with a couple of serious-looking people. "Diane, I'd like you to meet Catherine and James Morrison from the Morrison Foundation. They're interested in acquiring several pieces and possibly funding a larger project." The next hour blurred into conversations about my work, my vision, my process. Critics who'd dismissed me years ago now hung on my words. Gallery owners pressed business cards into my hand. And through it all, I felt Sarah's eyes on me, watching this version of myself she'd never bothered to see. When I finally had a moment alone, she approached. "Diane," she said carefully, "this is incredible. I had no idea you were working on something like this." "You never asked," I replied simply, without malice. I made a mistake, she said, the words tumbling out. Riley and it's not working. She doesn't understand me the way you. Sarah, I interrupted gently. I'm not interested in rehashing what we had. I'm grateful, actually. You shattered something in me that needed breaking. You reminded me I was disappearing. Michaela appeared at my side, her presence a quiet support. Sarah noticed immediately. Is this? Sarah asked. A friend, I said, and possibly more, but that's not really your concern anymore, is it? Sarah's face crumpled slightly, but she nodded and walked away. Riley followed, glancing back with something like confusion. They'd figure it out or they wouldn't. Either way, it was no longer my story. Michaela took my hand. You okay? More than okay, I said. For the first time in years, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. 3 months after the exhibition, I was in Michaela's loft, morning light streaming through the industrial windows. She was still asleep, one arm draped across my waist, her breathing steady and peaceful. I studied the lines of her face, the gray in her hair, the body that told stories of a life fully lived. This was nothing like what I'd had with Sarah. This was better, built on truth rather than comfort, on mutual respect rather than routine. My phone buzzed with an email from the Morrison Foundation. They were offering funding for a year-long project documenting LGBTQ plus women over 50 across the country. The opportunity I'd dreamed about 20 years ago, arriving now when I was finally ready for it. Michaela stirred, opened her eyes, and smiled. Good morning, beautiful. Morning, I said, showing her the email. They said yes? She sat up, reading over my shoulder, then kissed me deeply. Of course they did. When do we leave? We? You think I'm letting you travel the country alone? She grinned. Besides, I've been meaning to do a series on queer community spaces and architecture. We could collaborate. I thought about Sarah's words that night. She makes me feel young again. But youth had nothing to do with what I felt now. Michaela didn't make me feel young. She made me feel powerful, seen, alive in my actual skin at my actual age. That afternoon, I met Veronica for lunch at our favorite bistro. She took one look at me and laughed. There she is, she said, the Diane I've been waiting for. I didn't realize I'd been gone, I admitted. The worst kind of disappearing is the kind we do to ourselves, she said wisely. But you're back now, and from what I hear, you're thriving. She was right. The exhibition had led to commission offers, interview requests, and invitations to speak at universities. My calendar was full in a way it hadn't been in years. But more than the professional success, I'd reclaimed something essential, my sense of self, independent of anyone else's validation. That evening, Michaela and I started planning the road trip. Maps spread across her dining table, potential interview subjects identified, routes traced with colored markers. She'd look up from the laptop and catch me staring, and we'd get distracted, ending up tangled together on the couch, laughing at how we'd met and marveling at the timing. Do you ever wonder, she asked one night, what would have happened if you hadn't found that receipt? I considered it. I'd probably still be slowly erasing myself, convinced that comfort was the same as happiness. Comfort is overrated, she said. Give me messy and real any day. 6 months into our relationship, I ran into Riley at a coffee shop. She was alone, looking young and uncertain in a way that made me feel oddly maternal. Ms. Foster, she said awkwardly. I wanted to say, I'm sorry, for my part in everything. How are you and Sarah? I asked, genuinely curious. She shook her head. We ended things a month ago. It turns out we didn't have much in common beyond... She trailed off, embarrassed. Beyond the thrill of something forbidden, I finished gently. Riley, can I tell you something? She nodded. Youth is wonderful, but it's not the prize everyone thinks it is. The real gift is knowing yourself well enough to build a life that actually fits. That takes time. That takes experience. She looked at me with something like understanding. Sarah talks about you sometimes, about how she didn't appreciate what she had. Tell her I hope she figures out what she wants, I said. And Riley, don't waste your 20s trying to be older. There's plenty of time for everything else. As I walked back to Michaela's place, I thought about what experience really meant. It wasn't about being better than someone younger or proving anything to Sarah. It was about finally, fully inhabiting my own life, with all its complications, desires, and possibilities. At 52, I was just getting started. 2 years later, the book of photographs from our cross-country project hit bestseller lists. Michaela and I split our time between her loft and my newly renovated studio space. We traveled, we created, we built something neither of us had to shrink to fit into. I never did thank Sarah for that betrayal, but maybe I should have. Sometimes we need to be broken to remember we were never fragile to begin with, just dormant, waiting for the right moment to bloom again. Experience taught me that the best chapters are often the ones you write after you thought the story was over. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Have you discovered your power after loss? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you've reclaimed yourself. And if this story resonated with you, follow for more tales of transformation, resilience, and the unapologetic power of women who refuse to disappear. Your second act might just be your best one yet.